All right, welcome America to another On the Blue Line podcast with Wayne Mulder, and I am your host, you guessed it, Wayne Mulder. Happy to be back with you again this week. By the time you are listening to this podcast, it is the middle of August. We should be in about the third week when this one releases. Bear with me a little while, like I said in the previous episode. Unfortunately, these are coming out a few weeks in advance, allowing me to keep the new content coming to you, but because of that, they are not necessarily timely. We're running about 3 to 4 weeks behind from when I'm recording them to when you are seeing them. Hence the fact that if you're watching this on video, I still have the beard, which hopefully by the time you are watching or listening to this episode, I will have had to have shaved because I will be back to work. So, I hope everyone is doing well. This is Morning Roll Call, and thank you so much for joining me. What I like about Morning Roll Call, if you are new to the podcast, and this is the first one you're listening to, let me tell you a little bit about On the Blue Line. We started in 2019. There is a podcast, there is a blog, and there is a community that is beginning to grow, and I welcome you. As far as for the podcast, there's two. The Morning Roll Call, that is what you're listening to. And on here, it's just something short. I'm just going to go over something that's kind of actionable. Sometimes it's political related, something out of the news. Sometimes I'm going to grab something that is just an interesting news story or a scary news story, as I did today. And then sometimes it's just some sort of helpful anecdote that I can provide to you. The bottom line with all of them is in some way, I always try to rope it back or bring it back to law enforcement because all of these things that are going on in the world do affect law enforcement in one way or another. And then secondly is the interview room. And those podcasts will be coming back. My goal is to get them back to you by September. In the works right now on getting some of those interviews completed and getting a backlog of them so that once we start again, we do not stop again. So, and for more on all that, if you go back 2 episodes, you'll get a little bit of the story behind why there was a break and also the story on why we started on the Blue Line in the first place. So, that's all I got for you. Let's get into it. So first and foremost, what I wanted to bring to your attention, and again, this will be a few weeks old by the time that you listen to this episode because it happened in mid-July, but it is... If you didn't hear this in the news, you need to hear this story. That's why I'm telling you. So, a body cam video, which there's a link in the show notes, and I encourage you to watch it because just listening to what's going on seeing it, it is probably one of the scariest things as a law enforcement officer to even consider happening because what could have happened next is just something you don't even want to think about. But essentially, the police were called. This happened at the Unified Police Department. And the police are called to this McDonald's, right? So there's an incident that takes place at this McDonald's. And it sounds like the dad, who's 27 years old, this Sadat Johnson, he gets into some sort of disagreement, argument. There's some sort of incident that occurs in the early afternoon hours, so around 1:30 p.m. on February 21st at this McDonald's. Allegedly, according to the McDonald's employees, that he gets upset about his fast food order, it wasn't correct, and whatever is occurring in that argument, he allegedly brandishes a handgun. They use the word allegedly. Obviously, he has not been convicted yet. He was just been arrested. However, it also says that there's video to support it. So, you take that however you want to take it. But essentially, that's what's being alleged, is he gets in an argument with him, and then he ends up brandishing a handgun. We get these kind of calls, these some sort of aggravated assault, disagreement calls all the time. Any of you in law enforcement are well aware of that. So police get there, and a little bit of an officer safety situation is kind of erupting. You see them coming up on this white car, extremely dark tinted windows. The guy doesn't put the windows down. He's barely listening to commands anyway. You already know that there's a chance that this guy has a firearm in the car. So the whole thing is just... watching it from knowing what could happen at any point here, the whole thing's disturbing anyway. So you're watching this whole thing unfold, and he eventually does open the door. They tell him, hey, open it with your right hand. He reaches over, and he has a phone in his hand. They tell him to set the phone down, actually, before he reaches over, and then he gets out of the car. Let me rephrase that. He's helped out of the car, because the getting out of the car thing seemed to be what he wanted to do very slowly, probably because he knew there actually was a firearm in the vehicle. So this is all unfolding. Well, while they get dad down on the ground, there's only 2 kids left in the car. And you don't really know that but the officers knew that because they're coming up on the vehicle as you do, on both sides, and they're seeing what's going on in there. Well, all of a sudden, there is a shot that takes off. There is a round that is fired, and you hear the shots fired. You hear it go out over the radio, and then you hear one of the officers yelling, "Kids, kids, kids!" So essentially, one of the children who are 3 years old and 4 years old picks up Dad's gun and decides that what they want to do is shoot at the cops. Now, that seems like a really bad idea and probably the last thing that a 3 or 4 year old should have going through their mind, let alone the fact that how did they even have access to the gun? Anyway, quoting, police said the child told them, quote, "I grabbed my dad's gun and tried to shoot the police so he could be free and do what he wanted," end quote. The 4-year-old reportedly told police that he shot the gun because he wanted his daddy back. The child also informed police that during the altercation, Johnson told the children the police officer cannot open the door. So clearly he had already been educating his children on, we're not going to cooperate with these law enforcement officers, even though I've been completely in the wrong and decided to point a gun at a lady at McDonald's for not getting me my order correct. Oh, and by the way, Johnny, here, let me just leave this gun right here. Do with it whatever you need to do. What in the heck is going on with society? It just flabbergasts me. I wrote an article. There's a blog post. It actually will come out right around the time that this releases. So in about 3 to 4 weeks from when I'm recording. So it's going to be right around the time that this podcast comes out. Look for it. And this is exactly what I go into, is these disturbing trend. And I quote some other experts and I put some other information in there and go a little bit deeper into it. But this absolutely disturbing trend that's going on with these children. Like, these are little kids, 3 and 4 years old. The other one I talked about in that article is the young children up in Minnesota. I mean, toddlers in diapers, cursing and yelling profanities at cops, kicking at them. We have a problem. Not only do we have a problem in current society, society is going to have a future problem if we don't come together on these type of issues and say, this isn't acceptable, this stops now, and we are not going to perpetuate this going forward. And it's only going to make it more dangerous for law enforcement. And not only the dangerous part of, Lord forbid, one of them had been shot by this kid, but then the other side of not fully knowing who's shooting at you. I mean, the situation that this would put these officers in is beyond unbelievable. And it's tragic. And that's really all I can say on that. So I wanted to bring that story to your attention. Please go to the show notes at ontheblueline.com and be sure to check out the different links there, because those links will take you and you can actually watch that video if you haven't seen it. All right, so for this week, I wanted to do something a little bit unorthodox. If you've been listening the last couple weeks, I've talked about the new eBook that came out in July. And it's a small book that I wrote. And in fact, calling it a book is probably a little unfair. It's more like a large pamphlet. But it is 30, 40 pages, takes you roughly a half hour to read. So it is technically a book, but it isn't a very big book. So it's a little ebook, and it's called How the Law Enforcement Career Makes You Cynical. The main reason I'm pushing it, if you would, right now is because it is absolutely free, no strings attached, nothing more than I wanted to get the content out to the people who've been listening and supporting On the Blue Line. So for at least the next couple weeks, it's going to no longer be free as of September 1st. But up until September 1st, it is free on the website, ontheblueline.com. You do have to enter an email. Like all email lists, you can unsubscribe if that happens to be the block or the reason why you just can't get the book is because you have to give your email. But that's the only quote-unquote catch, if you would, is you have to enter an email. And then once you do that, you will get a link to the book, and it is absolutely free until September 1st. After that, it's only going to be available as a Kindle ebook. Still only a few dollars, but it will only be available as a Kindle ebook. And if you would rather go that route, it is available on Kindle right now. So whichever you'd prefer. What I want to do, though, is read a section from it. So where this pamphlet came from, I was actually just sat down. It originally was only 6 pages. So I just took a snapshot of 3 main issues that I saw that kind of led to cynicism, right? Because anyone who's been in law enforcement for more than a year, and for some of us who've been in law enforcement now more than 10 years, there are things that definitely can lead to cynicism and patterns that you've seen over and over again throughout your career. And that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. I wanted to point out, hey, some of the scenes that you see. So one of the first points I make is, some of the things that we see in this career, they're not normal, right? And then the second thing I kind of point out is, hey, the schedule that you work is abnormal. Yes, there are other careers that have tough schedules, but I think when you add our tough schedule to some of the demands and some of the other craziness that's specific to this career, that can lead to a level of cynicism. And then thirdly, I don't know how many times, and anyone listening to this can attest, that we've heard people complain or there's this constant bitching about administration. And fortunately, I've been able to work at a location where I've not had that issue to the same degree. But I hear these stories from all across the country, and some of them are truly nightmare stories, and that can lead to cynicism. So then and again, there's a million other things, right? So this is going to actually grow and evolve into something bigger that I'm working on right now. But I wanted to get this content out to you first. And then I kind of give you 3 things from my life that I did that helped me combat that cynicism, or just overall helped when it came to the area of mental health and law enforcement. So what I'm going to do today is I'm just going to quickly read. It's a small section. I'm going to read you number 2. This is number 2 of the 3 things that I kind of learned or was able to help me when it came to law enforcement. And in this case, and the reason I want to read this one is it actually kind of taught me what I've learned from law enforcement and how that helps me in other areas of my life. So I'm just going to take a minute and read this section to you. It's not very long. It'll just take me a few minutes, and I hope you get something out of it. So number 2 in this book, How the Law Enforcement Career Makes You Cynical and What You Can Do About It. Law enforcement has the potential to be the most significant catalyst to success in life because of who I had to become to be successful in law enforcement. Imagine that not only do you not have to be a victim of what happens to you and around you, the training and who you will become as a law enforcement officer will be the same tools that will set you up for success in other areas of your life. This thinking often contradicts the ominous warnings of this career that you have heard. Before law enforcement, I ran a small business that I had started in my early 20s. I won't retell the whole story here right now. The basic situation was that I had big dreams and goals, no life experience, and no knowledge of what to do when things go awry. I had sales experience that came naturally and allowed me to build something quickly. Too quickly. I had no financial experience running a business and no infrastructure around me of resources and people to learn from when the inevitable collapse came. Instead, I tried to save it by starting more businesses without fixing the core issues. And this only led to me being bankrupt and losing my home before my 20s were over. When I look back at these years, I also see those things in my life that needed strengthening. I was good at sales, but no longer wanted to communicate when things fell apart. In many ways, my trying to start more businesses to fix the failing business was the equivalent of hiding under a rock. It solved nothing, and the problems only grew until the inevitable collapse. The irony is that when I came to law enforcement in my 30s, I began to see that some of the strength of this profession would sharpen these ragged edges within me. Responding to chaotic scenes teaches you something about courage and dealing with problems directly. When the world is falling apart around you and people are yelling and screaming, the radio is chirping, backup is a distance away, and victims need help, it is your scene. You make the decisions, and you determine the plan to attack it the best that you can. All of this within moments of your arrival on the scene. You will not succeed in this career if you try to hide under a rock. This trait is almost always rooted out in the field training process because your safety and the safety of others are at stake. Another thing you learn in these moments is to find your voice. I tended in my previous life not to want to rock the boat. I would like to go into a particular direction, but being plagued by indecision and uncertainty, I would let it pass by, never speaking up. Law enforcement does not allow this insecurity to remain. You must be confident, speak confidently, walk confidently, and approach the worst of situations with confidence. It will catch up to you, but if you can't speak up and provide direction. The public may not even think about it, but even on the worst of calls and scenes, a brand new deputy may be the scene supervisor, even if only for minutes. Whoever is there is in charge until the next person of higher rank relieves them. Depending on the agency's size or the area's remoteness, a deputy or a corporal could be the supervisor on an intense scene for long periods. These experiences have taught you courage, leadership, scene management, and proper applications of resources, just as they have me. They also taught me one other thing that took me a lot longer. It was years into my career before it finally was shown to me and I began to apply it regularly. That was to breathe. I spoke earlier about a shooting incident where a bad guy decided to turn a neighborhood into a war zone. Scenes like that go on for hours until there is a relief and you can go back to the command post. That evening was no different. I'll never forget when the after-action review took place weeks later. A supervisor in charge of looking at all the body-worn camera footage and offering feedback made a life-changing comment to me. He stated, "Next time, remember to breathe." He went on to talk about how he knew I wasn't breathing correctly for hours during the incident because there was one moment in the end when we were relieved that I finally just took one deep breath and began to relax. That was the best advice and reminder I've ever received. I have applied it in subsequent events and even in completing projects to a deadline in this business. I take time to breathe regularly and deeply. I find this simple lesson born under the tragic circumstance was one that changed my life positively. Remember, as you consider all the negative aspects of law enforcement that you are now looking at as opportunities to develop yourself into your best self. You also view all the positive tools you can add to your toolbox. These are assets that will help you in your family, church, business, community, or whatever situation you may be. And then at the end of the chapter, there are a few questions for a little self-reflection if that is something you would like to do. So that's what I have for you this week. I want you to think about it, though. Think about the things in the law enforcement career and the tools and the ways that it's changed you for the better and the tools that it's given you that you're going to be able to apply to other areas of your life. That's part of what this whole mission of On the Blue Line is all about. It is to help you recognize the tools that you already have for whatever those dreams are and those goals are that you want to achieve. And then to help you sharpen them and to prepare yourself so that either if you decide to leave the career early and you're looking, maybe you're going to start some sort of side hustle or side business, or when you retire, maybe you're someone who started at 20 years old and you're going to be retiring at 45 and you want to do a second career, or whatever your situation will be, law enforcement can be one of the greatest things that gets you ready. But it's not going to work out that way if you resolve to cynicism and you resolve to falling into some of these traps that are created by some of the negative parts of the career. So that's what I want to leave you with this week. I hope that you will join us again next week. And in the meantime, I want you to be safe out there on the Blue Line.